So Blizzard have just announced some changes to baseline mobility for both Death Knights and Paladins, the two classes that was mentioned some time ago by Blizzard as being able to have weaker mobility because of having stronger defensives. And this has brought to mind my thoughts about the interchangeability of mobility and defenses, which is what I'd like to discuss in this short video. With the change to mobility for Paladins and Deathknights, it brings into focus the earlier statement that a weakness in one can be compensated by a strength in the other. Now, the first thing to point out, from a purely PvE point of view, is that an ability might look strong on the face of it, but can still be weak if it doesn't help you on the actual encounters. For example, which is it best to have? A 30-second cooldown that reduces damage taken by 30%? Or an immunity with a 5-minute cooldown? Well, if the encounter produces frequent bursts of damage that will take off half your health, then the first one is best. If there's no raid-wide damage, but once per fight an ability that goes out that will one-shot you if you don't deal with it in exactly the right way, then the latter is better. Of course, fights are not homogeneous when it comes to things like this, and you'll have to look at the whole suite and decide which is best overall. So you can never say one class's defensives are better just by looking at them in isolation, unless of course you've got a situation where one class basically has none. It's always dependent on the nature of the raid tier. But coming back to that philosophy of defensives and mobility being interchangeable, let's look at it a bit more closely, and this applies mostly to melee. Of course, range sometimes need to move as well, but this tends to be purely down to mechanics. Switching targets doesn't often require much movement. So if the melee camp has to move across the room from the boss to an important ad or group of ads which can't be brought to the melee position, then what good is a defensive? Does it allow you to move more quickly to them? No. Does it mean you can use your abilities at range so you can be doing some DPS while you move more slowly towards them? No. So how does it compensate for having to move at normal speed while everyone else is already there and damaging those ads? Simple, it doesn't. Now let's look at it the other way around. So a load of raid damage is going out, like Overwhelming Chaos on Zul'Harak, Wrought Chaos on Archimonde, Feast of Souls on Gorefiend. Healers aren't able to cover us all for all of this time, so our own personal defensives are required. Does really good movement help us avoid this damage? No, it doesn't. In fact, moving quickly could well make it worse in some cases. The only time defensives and mobility can be interchangeable are when we have a timed ground effect. In this case, high mobility could move out until it's safe and then back in, while good defensive could presumably stay in and take it on the chin. All of this assumes that both the mobility and the defensive can be used frequently enough to do this in all cases. And of course these situations do occur on some bosses, but is it common? No, of course not. It's far more common for personal defensives to be needed when unavoidable damage is going out, and also far more common for mobility to be needed when you all have to move. Now this change doesn't really come with a believable explanation. Simply saying that they've heard the feedback and agreed doesn't make so much sense when that feedback has been coming for over half a year. It would be pleasant to think that that old philosophy of defensives and mobility has been abandoned, and that we can now agree that all melee need a defensive and mobility toolkit, not just interrupts, which is basically the only thing melee had in common before this. Now, in my opinion, the interrupts are actually the least important part of the three because there are much fewer fights when you need an interrupt rotation. Now, if they have decided that that old philosophy, after all, isn't really fitting, they might just look at all the melee specs again and make sure that all of them have what they need for the planned encounters. That might mean that some of them might get slightly better defensives when it's considered that a mobility is not going to cover for it, or vice versa. It's absolutely fine, of course, for some of those specs to have better mobility than others and some to have better defensives. We can all have class differences without inadequacies, but it's important that everyone has sufficient tools for the content and to deal with those mechanics. So I hope you found those thoughts interesting. If you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe and share. And of course, if you've got anything further to add, then of course, absolutely put them in the comments below. And until next time, I'll see you later.